Clarence had fallen for my friend. He brought her along, confronting his parents in public, and boldly announced that he was breaking off our engagement. He turned to me, his expression cold. "I never liked her," he declared to both families. "Marrying her would only disgust me." That was the moment I stopped caring about Clarence. Later, other boys started confessing their feelings for me. But Clarence, despite his earlier words, desperately tried to prevent me from being with anyone else. He held up the marriage certificate he had written for me when we were children. "You promised," he reminded me. "When we grew up, you'd marry only me." That evening, Clarence was in the middle of an argument with his parents and my friend when I arrived. I stomped the snow off my shoes, reaching for the door handle, but his voice stopped me. "I've told you before," he said sharply. "I never agreed to that ridiculous engagement." His cold laugh cut through the tense air. "That engagement was arranged by our parents when you were just kids," his father retorted. "Are you really bringing this girl here to humiliate your uncle and Aunt Chu?" Peeking through the narrow crack in the door, I saw Clarence standing rigidly in front of his father. My parents sat silently to the side, their faces dark. Clarence clenched Jenny's hand tighter. "This is my girlfriend," he declared defiantly. His father's face turned red with anger. "You can only marry Caroline. You have no other choice." A tremor ran through me. Without thinking, I pushed the door open. All eyes turned to me. Clarence barely glanced at me before addressing his parents again. "I never liked her," he repeated. "Marrying her would only disgust me." He didn't wait for a response. Gripping Jenny's hand, he turned and walked away, throwing one last indifferent glance in my direction. Behind them, I could hear his parents apologizing hastily, while my father's face contorted with fury. He looked as if he wanted to chase after Clarence and knock some sense into him. I didn't move. I simply watched their backs disappear. Clarence and I had grown up together. He had never denied our engagement before, not even when people teased us about it. He always laughed it off. I had thought he liked me, just as I liked him. That night, my parents took turns comforting me for hours before finally letting me sleep. My mother even called in for me so I wouldn't have to return to the dormitory. Just as I was drifting off, my phone screen lit up. A message from Clarence. "I'm downstairs. Come down, we need to talk." I remembered his words from earlier that day. The friend I had trusted had cut me down with cruelty just to be with someone else. I didn't go downstairs. But I also didn't sleep well. In my dreams, I saw young Clarence at his desk, carefully writing something. When he was done, he jumped off the chair and ran to my younger self. "Caroline, don't cry," he had said, his small hands pressing a handwritten marriage certificate into mine. "When we grow up, you'll marry me. I'll protect you." The moon broke through the last of the clouds, and its light flickered in my half-awake eyes. I wiped away the dampness at the corners of my eyes. The next morning, on my way to school, Clarence blocked my path. "You're leaving this late? Did you skip breakfast again?" His tone was familiar, as if nothing had changed. He handed me a small bag, the scent of warm food wafting from it. "What I said yesterday wasn't meant to hurt you. I was just angry. That's why I said those things." I took a step back, refusing to take the breakfast. "I don't need it," I said flatly. "Eating anything from you would only disgust me." Clarence withdrew his hand, his expression darkening. "Does yelling at me make you feel better?" His voice dropped lower. "Caroline, I hope you won't cause trouble for Jenny. She hasn't done anything wrong. I was the one who liked her first." Clarence's words were convenient. But I knew Jenny had played a part in all of this. At school, Jenny approached me, holding a cup of milk. The entire class turned to watch. "Caroline, would you like some milk?" she asked softly. "Can you forgive me?" I glanced at the cup, then met her eyes. "What exactly do I need to forgive?" Her hands trembled slightly. "I shouldn't have sent Clarence a follow request on Instagram," she murmured. "I didn't know he was your boyfriend at the time." She tugged at my sleeve, her voice choked. "Caroline, please don't be mad. If you want, I can give him back to you." Before I could respond, her friend interjected. "Jenny, why are you apologizing?" She scoffed, looking at me. "Caroline and Clarence were just childhood friends, weren't they? You didn't steal her boyfriend. She folded her arms, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Also, Caroline, stop pretending to be so high and mighty. Their little act was almost laughable. So that's the game? One plays the good girl, the other the bad one. I pulled my sleeve free from Jenny's grasp. I didn't use much force, but Jenny let out a startled cry, stumbling back. She crashed into my desk, knocking the cup over. Hot milk spilled all over her uniform. At that moment, Clarence walked in. Jenny, are you hurt? He rushed to her side, quickly removing his jacket and draping it over her shoulders, his face full of concern. Jenny sniffled. It's fine. The classroom filled with disapproving whispers, all aimed at me. I chuckled bitterly. Why are you all looking at me? She ran into me herself. Clarence barely spared me a glance. I'll take you to the infirmary, he told Jenny, lifting her into his arms. Not once did he look back at me. That afternoon, Jenny's friend decided to get revenge. She purposely bumped into me, spilling her water, then shoved me down. Oops, sorry. I didn't mean to, she said with a smirk, striding away without a care. I looked up, meeting Clarence's gaze from across the hall. His expression was cold, indifferent, like I was a stranger. Just before the next class started, I walked in, still damp. I carried a bottle filled with a warm, pale yellow liquid. Without hesitation, I opened the bottle and poured its contents over Jenny's head. I did that on purpose, I said, my voice even. And I'm not going to apologize. Jenny shrieked, jumping up. What did you pour on me? I smirked but didn't answer. Let her panic. Only later, when the situation escalated, did I clarify to the teacher. It was just hot water, I said. With 2 tea leaves. After that, I was shunned by the entire class. Everyone began to distance themselves from me. I even started questioning myself. Had I done something wrong? If I had, why was I the one being pushed aside? Meanwhile, Clarence and Jenny had become the inseparable couple, the ideal duo of top students. The day they openly acknowledged their relationship was also the day I decided to confront Clarence. Are you going to the class party on Friday night? The class monitor paused for a long time. After consulting everyone, she came to test the waters with me. I kept my face neutral, but my hand under the table tightened into a fist. Maybe I wasn't as disliked as I thought. At the party, everyone sat together playing Truth or Dare. The bottle pointed to Clarence. Someone mischievously asked, if Caroline and your so-called girlfriend Jenny both fell into water at the same time, who would you save? At that moment, I didn't think it would turn into something I had expected. Clarence and the others were sitting right across from me. The atmosphere instantly grew tense. I lowered my gaze, staring intently at my drink, not daring to blink. I knew I could make an excuse to leave. But for some reason, I stayed still. The guy across from me chuckled lightly. His tone was calm, not too fast nor slow. What do you mean by so-called girlfriend? She's my girlfriend. Didn't I tell you that? Out of the corner of my eye. He casually placed his arm around Jenny's shoulder and asked, Jenny, can you swim? No, she replied, slightly embarrassed. Clarence sighed gently, his voice warm with affection. If you fall into the sea, I guess I'd have to carry you and swim all the way, huh? He didn't answer directly, but the message was clear. It was obvious. Jenny was his girlfriend, so saving her first was natural. I closed my eyes briefly, trying to hide the bitter sting in my heart. The others started to joke and tease. I barely moved, shrinking further into myself, afraid of being met with pity or mockery. But Jenny wasn't letting me off that easily. When it was my turn, she flashed a sweet smile, appearing innocent. In a soft voice she asked, Caroline, is there anyone here you like? She clarified, even if it's someone you liked before, it still counts. She said the cruelest things with the sweetest tone, making everyone believe it was just a joke. If you're lying, your whole family will die a terrible death. I felt trapped, with no way to escape. If I stood up and made a scene, I'd probably be alienated forever. People would start looking at me strangely again. I glanced up at Jenny, meeting her gaze. Yes. As soon as I spoke, I could feel Clarence's intense gaze on me. Jenny smiled, linking her arm with Clarence's. I see. Had this happened earlier, I would have felt embarrassed, stuck, and unable to get away. But somehow, after admitting I'd liked Clarence, that feeling seemed to vanish. It was like the faintest breeze had blown away the last remnants of my unspoken feelings for him. The wind passed, and the surface of the water remained unchanged. At 17, I finally let go of my 3-year-long crush. I realized I didn't have feelings for Clarence anymore. Caroline. The party was winding down, and just as I was about to leave, Clarence called my name. He approached, his face a mix of emotions. Today, you said you liked someone, he began. He hesitated for a moment before asking, was it me? Honestly, I couldn't bring myself to feel anything for the guy standing in front of me anymore. Yes, I answered simply. But that was in the past. When you pointed at me and said marrying me would be disgusting, I stopped liking you. Besides, you're with Jenny now. I've truly moved on. Clarence pressed his lips together in silence. I didn't mean to hurt you. I've always seen you as a little sister. I didn't want to hear his hollow words anymore. Caroline, I'll make it up to you. But I immediately rejected him, showing through my actions that I wanted to distance myself from him and his girlfriend. But Clarence didn't get it. He continued doing things to fill the void of his guilt. He insisted on bringing me breakfast, despite me rejecting it every time. His occasional acts of kindness made Jenny believe I was trying to steal Clarence away from her. She began making my life difficult. The day before the exam results came out, Jenny was called to the office. When she returned, she was crying, her face buried in her hands. Rumors began circulating that she had cheated on the exam. Neither Clarence nor her friends believed she'd done it. After all, she was the second highest-ranking student, just behind Clarence. Impossible. That cheat sheet they found couldn't be hers. Yeah, Jenny isn't that kind of person. I didn't pay much attention to the gossip. But I did notice that I had done better on the exam. After checking the answers, I saw that I had made fewer mistakes than usual. When the results came out, before I could celebrate, Clarence blocked my path after school. Caroline, did you do it? I was confused. What? Frame Jenny for cheating. Wasn't it you? Wasn't that cheat sheet you planted? He interrogated me coldly, moving closer. Am I really that free? I scoffed. Do you think I care about her that much to cause trouble? Clarence's eyes were sharp, studying me closely. Then why did your score improve? Can't it be because I studied harder? I couldn't take it anymore. Clarence, stop being so paranoid. His face darkened, and then he sneered. Caroline, what happened to you? Frame someone, and you still haven't learned your lesson? Clarence shook his head, disappointment filling his gaze. Is this how your family raised you? I almost retorted in anger, but before I could, Clarence pressed something on his phone, showing me a video. After the exam, just before lunch, I was the only one who entered the office. It was all part of Jenny's plan. The cheat sheet had been deliberately placed in her test paper. She knew the questions, so no one suspected she had cheated. And with this video, I was directly implicated. Clarence looked at me coldly before tossing one final remark. Everyone must face the consequences of their actions. I placed my last hope on the teacher. After all, this was a matter that couldn't be resolved with clear-cut evidence. It was all about perception and individual interpretation. The teacher stared at me, disappointment evident in her gaze. What exactly are you trying to prove here? She asked. Are you upset that Jenny outperformed you? My throat went dry, and my strength seemed to drain from me all at once. I couldn't get a single word out. Clarence entered the office with Jenny, who was still sobbing. Aren't we supposed to be close? She wailed. I've always considered you a good friend. Is this really how you repay me? In a fit of frustration, she grabbed a thick book from the desk and slammed it into my face. Through her tears, she continued, You nearly destroyed my life with this. Do you even realize what you've done? Clarence remained silent, turning his face away as if avoiding the scene. The teacher reprimanded Jenny briefly for hitting me and gave me a pointed look, signaling me to keep quiet. Then she changed the subject. Caroline, if you apologize, I won't cancel your exam results, she suggested. I knew that if my results were nullified, I'd be forced into the advanced class for my final year, but I couldn't bring myself to confess to something I hadn't done. I didn't frame Jenny for cheating, I repeated firmly. As the words left my mouth, a sharp pain shot through my nose. Jenny had slapped me hard enough to draw blood. I didn't care about the stunned expressions around me. I turned and walked away without a second thought. "Stop," Clarence called, chasing after me and stepping in front of me. When he saw the blood on my face, his frown deepened. "You need to apologize to Jenny," he said, his tone accusatory. "She shouldn't have to deal with this because of you." I wiped my nose and showed him my hand. "Can I clean up first?" I asked quietly, the exhaustion evident in my voice. I felt drained, like I was hanging on the edge of a cliff with no strength left to hold on. Clarence furrowed his brow. "I'll take you." He reached out, attempting to pull me along. But I stepped back, my eyes empty of any emotion. "Clarence," I said softly. "Please, just leave me alone." I still didn't apologize to Jenny, but it felt like everyone assumed I was the one who had framed her. Even classmates who had previously ignored me began whispering behind my back. The exam I had been confident about was disqualified. Though I appeared calm on the outside, internally, I was unraveling. The next day, we were supposed to attend a school-organized summer camp, and no one was allowed to skip unless they had a valid reason. This, of course, gave Jenny another chance to target me. "Jenny and Caroline, you're in the same group. Go collect some branches," the teacher instructed. Once we entered the forest, Jenny's true intentions became clear. Quietly, I pulled out my voice recorder from my bag. "You must be really upset that I stole Clarence away, huh?" she said, her tone casual as she stood behind me. I decided to play along. "So, you planted that cheat sheet to make Clarence hate me, so I wouldn't have a chance with him again?" She glanced around, smirking before she answered. "Exactly. No one believes you're innocent anyway. How does it feel?" Her voice dripped with satisfaction. "Was it painful when that book hit you?" I had gathered what I needed. With this recording, she'd be finished, her reputation destroyed, likely even expelled or transferred. But she wasn't done yet. As I turned to walk away, she shoved me hard, sending me tumbling down the slope. In her moment of triumph, she twisted her ankle and fell with me. We ended up stuck on a tree trunk, hanging dangerously from the slope. I struggled to get back up, but it was no use. Clarence must have heard Jenny's scream, because he was the first to arrive. "Clarence, I'm so scared," Jenny cried, looking at him with wide, tearful eyes. He glanced at me, sympathy in his gaze. "I'm sorry, Caroline." He extended his hand to Jenny. "I'll help you once she's up." Jenny hesitated, then began climbing with Clarence's help. I pressed my lips together and gave a faint, stiff reply. "Okay. Thanks." There was no reason for me to complain. Jenny was his girlfriend. Of course he'd help her first. I was surprised he even offered me any assistance at all. As Jenny climbed higher, she intentionally stepped on my hand, grinding it beneath her foot. I winced in pain and, unable to hold on, I slid further down the hill. "Caroline," Clarence called out, his voice filled with concern. Jenny continued her act, not missing a beat. Luckily, the leaves below cushioned my fall, and the slope wasn't too steep. I finally came to a stop, my back hitting a tree trunk. I had scratches and bruises all over my body, but the worst injury was from the impact on my back. I slowly propped myself up, realizing I was lost. My phone had no signal. Jenny was doing everything in her power to prevent anyone from helping me. In the end, I used the compass on my phone to navigate my way out of the forest. By the time I reached the meeting point, the group had already left. I stopped trying to call the teacher and laughed bitterly before calling my parents. Though the injury wasn't severe, I had to stay in the hospital for observation overnight. That evening, after my parents had gone home, Clarence came to visit me. "Caroline." His voice was hoarse, strained. I had been staring out at the darkening sky, lost in thought. As I heard him, I turned slightly and saw him standing there, his gaze on me.
Today, while I was trying to find my way out of the woods, I suddenly remembered our school trip to the forest park. I paused and looked at him. "Do you remember?" He looked confused, clearly not recalling. I continued, emotionless. That time I was bitten by a snake, even though you knew it wasn't poisonous, you still carried me to the hospital right away. It was so hot that day, and you ran the whole way, drenched in sweat, but you never put me down. Because you knew I was afraid of pain. I was lying on your back and I thought. I sighed softly. I really liked you, Clarence. How could people change so quickly? Why did the boy who used to take care of me in every little detail, always put me first, now say I was disgusting? Why did he allow others to hurt me? Even when my life was in danger, he chose to do nothing. Clarence's eyes were full of regret. He couldn't argue. All he could do was apologize. I'm sorry, Caroline. I was wrong, really wrong. Please forgive me, I won't leave you alone again. I took a deep breath. Looking at him, I raised my hand and slapped him. How dare you ask for my forgiveness? I stared at him. Go save Jenny first. She's your girlfriend. I can't blame you. But you knew it was dangerous when I fell, even though we've only known each other for 10 years, we're just classmates. Couldn't you at least tell the teacher or call the police? You're as cold-blooded as an animal. What if I hadn't made it out of the forest? I might have never had the chance to hear his useless words. Clarence looked defeated, unable to stand. He knelt by my bed and reached out to hold my hand. His voice trembled, his dark eyes full of pain. I'm sorry, Caroline. I forgot, I really forgot. Jenny's situation was just too urgent. I tugged at the dry corner of my mouth, avoiding him. What kind of urgency could she have had, considering she didn't even fall? Get out. Clarence didn't move, but looked at me pleadingly. When my gaze shifted to the glass on the bedside table, Jenny pushed the door to the room open. But she looked worse than me, sitting in a wheelchair with a sickly expression. Caroline, don't blame why. Her eyes were slightly red, on the verge of tears. Because I twisted my ankle, I was so afraid of the pain, I begged him to take me to the hospital first. Yes, that's how urgent her situation was. I'm sorry. I thought my boyfriend would always put me first, I forgot that he was different, he still has you, his childhood friend. I was selfish. She sobbed as she tried to stand up. Just before she fell, Clarence rushed to catch her. Then he carried her back to the wheelchair. The moment he turned to look at me, I suddenly lost control of my emotions. I crashed everything near me towards the two of them. Clarence shielded Jenny. And a piece of glass hit him on the forehead, drawing blood. Get out. I can't stand looking at you two for another second. I glared at them, every word heavy. Both of you disgust me. Jenny was considerate as always. Pulling at Clarence's sleeve, ready to leave. Clarence stared at me silently for a long while. Before they left, as they opened the door, I suddenly spoke. Jenny. The figure in the wheelchair froze. Before I fell down the hill, you gave me a gift. I stared deeply at her back, my hand unconsciously clutching the blanket, trembling. I will make good use of it. She paused for just a second before leaving, unaffected. To Jenny, everything she did seemed flawless. Add to that her repeated victories, leaving her unscathed each time, and it was inevitable she'd get a little carried away. So, she didn't take my words seriously. In fact, right after leaving, she sent me a video she'd recorded earlier, taunting me. It was probably a video she secretly filmed with a camera she set up in advance. Jenny had only sprained her ankle. But Clarence, worried there might be other injuries, insisted on her staying in the hospital for observation for a day. In the video, Jenny was holding Clarence's waist, her voice soft. Do you blame me for not getting you to save Caroline in time? Clarence gently patted her head, letting out a small sigh. No. Jenny held him even tighter. Because you're my boyfriend, I was scared and could only turn to you. I thought I was the most important person to you. The video was blurry, but Clarence's voice rang out clearly in the hospital room. Jenny, you're always the most important person to me. Just after he said that, he cupped her chin and leaned in to kiss her. Right after this video, there was a message. Now you know why he didn't go down to the hill to find you. I stared blankly at my phone for a moment before shutting it off. I found myself wondering, what was I doing when they kissed? Oh. I was anxiously trying not to get bitten by a snake, enduring the pain in my body. slowly making my way out of the forest on my own. The wind that evening was colder than usual. Even though I already had a recording proving that Jenny was the mastermind behind the cheating in the exam. It was tricky because I had also been pushed down the hill by Jenny. But there was no evidence for that. A recording would hardly be enough to bring her down in my eyes. Just as I was considering whether I should only submit the recording, Erica, a classmate, came to me. After we got back to school, during free time. She came over to me when no one was watching. I saw everything. I glanced up at her. She continued, I was trying to explore a secluded area that day and saw Jenny push you. She also lied to the teacher, which is why no one came to help you. Seeing I wasn't responding, her face flushed a little as she slowly explained. I was too scared to speak out at the time. What if you had died there with no one to prove what happened? I was afraid Jenny might target me. It was a natural reaction. After all, if someone would push me down, they would likely have no qualms about valuing a life so little. I remained calm, trying to get more from her. You saw it, but it doesn't matter. The evidence won't be enough to convict her. Erica looked around, hesitating to speak. I waited in silence. Caroline, your family is wealthy. If I give you this evidence, can you really get her put in jail? She bit her lip, clearly scared. Because if you can't get her jailed, I'm afraid she'll come after me. I nodded, then smiled suddenly. You know, Jenny is already an adult. This meant the law couldn't be lenient with her anymore. Erica finally looked relieved. She took out her phone and showed me the video. From her angle, it clearly captured Jenny intentionally pushing me. As for the lie she told the teacher, there were more witnesses. According to Erica, after Jenny and the others returned, she sent Clarence away to help her find a car to take her to the hospital. Then, when everyone was about to leave and look for me, Jenny stopped them. Teacher, Caroline told me she wasn't feeling well and left early. I saw her family's car pick her up. The teacher was skeptical. I'll need to call her parents to confirm. Jenny visibly panicked. Why is there no signal? The teacher frowned at her phone. Jenny didn't give her a second chance to call. Don't you trust me? Isn't it normal for Caroline to leave early? After all, her family is so rich, it's normal she couldn't handle this place, right? I had already sensed the teacher's inexplicable bias against me during Jenny's slander. And how much she liked Jenny. At first, I thought it was just because Jenny was a good student. But now I realized it wasn't all about that. She probably had a deep-seated resentment toward wealth. Jenny had used this to her advantage, subtly bringing up my family background, fueling the teacher's dislike of me. At the right moment, Jenny shifted the topic, pretending to be in pain. My ankle's really swollen. Can you call my parents for me? Her actions flowed smoothly. And I lost any chance of being helped. Jenny was completely finished. But suddenly, I didn't want to see her destroyed right away. During Tuesday's break, I snuck into the broadcasting room when no one was paying attention. I hit record on the microphone. How did it feel? Was it painful when that book hit your face? Jenny's voice echoed clearly into everyone's ears. Unfortunately, I couldn't see her expression at that moment. Although I was scolded by the head of discipline for this, Jenny's reputation was shattered. Wait, Jenny really wrote those notes herself? My God, she's always been a goddess to me, how could she be this disgusting? The students' voices were full of unrestrained gossip. I watched as Jenny's face turned pale. At the same time, Clarence didn't look too good either. He stopped me while I was getting some hot water. His eyes full of panic and apology. Caroline. I misunderstood. I twisted the lid of the cup and spoke calmly. Say what you need to say, all at once. After a long pause, he finally spoke. Can you forgive me, Caroline? His tone was tentative. Without hesitation, I splashed the water into his face. It wasn't very hot, but it was enough to make him look pathetic. If you were me, do you think you could forgive me? Clarence stood still, letting me pour the water. The droplets fell from his hair, and he looked down, a sad smile on his face. Do you really hate me that much? That you don't even want our 10 years of friendship? The early spring wind was still cold, almost biting. Especially with Clarence's school uniform soaked. His shoulders shivered from the cold, yet he still stubbornly waited for my answer. Clarence. You don't have the right to bring up those 10 years. The moment my words fell, the hope in his eyes faded instantly. As he turned to leave, a quiet question came from behind. Really, can't you forgive me? How could I forgive him? How could I forgive someone whose actions made me completely let go of over 10 years of childhood affection in just 2 months? Just when Jenny thought this was the end, I sent her another message, leading her to the equipment room. It was a screenshot from the video Erica had sent me. What else do you want? Jenny gritted her teeth, her face pale. It seemed she hadn't been doing well these past few days. I held up a nearly 6-centimeter thick chinois dictionary, weighing it in my hand. Slap yourself, and stop when I say so. Or should I do it? Your choice. Jenny was afraid I'd hold a grudge and take revenge. So she held back her anger and began slapping herself. The red marks on her face deepened, swelling unevenly. Suddenly, footsteps came from outside the equipment room. I panicked. 2 girls alone. One with a swollen, red face. With Jenny's personality, I would probably be labeled as a school bully. As I froze for a moment, the footsteps grew louder. I looked at the door that had a small gap. Just as I stood there, startled, the door was closed. Which meant, someone outside had shut it for me. A kind act. After Jenny made her own nose bleed, I stopped her actions. Please. She muttered, barely moving her lips, afraid to make the wound worse. Don't give the video to the police. I let out a light laugh, mocking her absurdity. I pushed the door open and walked straight out. All done? A small voice suddenly came from the door, making me jump. The Good Samaritan who helped close the door was Erica, who had happened to pass by. I'll keep an eye on things. No one saw you hit her. I didn't hit her. From the start, I had planned not to lay a hand on her. Jenny slapped herself, so they couldn't pin anything on me. Thanks. I nodded at her and was about to leave. Caroline. Her face was filled with hesitation. A few seconds later, she shoved a drink into my hands without a word. I'm sorry, I didn't know the truth before, and just went along with everyone isolating you. She spoke so quickly, one long breath in between. If you need any help with your studies, or anything else, you can come to me. Goodbye. After that, she turned and quickly left without looking back. I stared at the warm drink in my hands. This was the first act of kindness I had received since I was isolated. That afternoon after school, I took the video to the police station. I stood at the school gate, watching Jenny being taken away by the police. She was crying and shouting. Please, don't take me away, I'm about to apply for college. Please, don't. The police car slowly shrank from my view, until it disappeared. For some reason, I thought back to the time when Jenny was even ranked higher than Clarence, the top student of the year. I remembered her back then, full of bright-eyed optimism. At the same time, the teacher involved couldn't escape the consequences. Her negligence, her strong biases against students, and her inability to differentiate right from wrong would ultimately cost her. Before being dismissed, she came to find me. She hoped I would write a letter of forgiveness. Why should I? I couldn't hide my disgust. Letting someone like you continue teaching is irresponsible to the students at any school. People like you should be crushed under the feet of those you despise the most, groveling and crawling, because that's what you deserve. The class got a new teacher. Soon, people realized it had all been a misunderstanding of me. They started talking to me, asking if I wanted to go out for lunch. But I started feeling out of place. It wasn't pretension. I had gotten used to being alone. I told myself, being by myself had its benefits. But as I grew more accustomed to being alone, I started feeling the need for another kind of noise. It was inevitable that I'd develop some exclusivity. So when the class leader asked again if I wanted to join the class party, I thought for a moment and shook my head, declining. But not every group activity could be avoided. For example, the cultural committee member took it upon herself to sign the whole class up for a choir. At that time, I didn't expect that the girl who had been ostracized 2 months ago would now become the center of attention. On the day of the arts festival, after I changed into my outfit, I hesitated for a long time before coming out of the bathroom. The clothes seemed to be the wrong size. The top was a bit too short. Caroline. Clarence had been cooperating with the police investigation in fits and starts lately, so he barely came to school. I stopped in my tracks, frowning. What do you want now? Clarence hadn't done anything wrong per se, but because he had been involved in everything, he got a written warning. He didn't mind my coldness, his eyes growing darker. I broke up with Jenny. Before, I didn't know about all the wrong things she had done. I was about to speak, but he cut me off. I know you hate me. He gave a self-deprecating smile and tugged at the corner of his mouth. I came here today just to explain, I really didn't know about what she had done. Whether you believe me or not, Caroline, I've never had ill intentions toward you. If it wasn't for Jenny's manipulation. He leaned weakly against the wall, shaking his head with a bitter smile. We never would have ended up like this. Clarence, you really are pathetic. I rubbed my forehead tiredly. Are you really at peace with putting all the blame on Jenny? Did someone force you to be with her? Clarence raised his gaze to meet mine, a helpless look flooding his expression. So, what should I do, Caroline? I don't know what to do to make you not hate me so much. His eyes suddenly darkened, and his expression became unreadable. I don't know what's wrong with me. Caroline, I think I couldn't take it anymore, and I didn't want to hear what he was about to say. I bypassed him and walked toward the backstage dressing room. Before stepping on stage, I unknowingly raised my hand, and a glimpse of my waist was caught in a photo. The picture was then posted to the confession wall. This girl is my type, please share her contact. Wow, she looks amazing, such a good waist, I want her contact too. I've seen her, she's probably the one performing on stage for this class. The post went viral quickly. It wasn't until I returned backstage and was blocked by a group of people that I understood what was happening. Can I have your phone number? A shy boy, his ears slightly red, was half pushed toward me by his friends. I was confused and was about to refuse when Clarence cut through the crowd and walked toward me. Caroline, congratulations on your performance. He smiled and handed me a bouquet of flowers. Who's he? I overheard someone whispering nearby. I don't know, but it looks like he's Caroline's boyfriend. The voice wasn't quiet, at least both Clarence and I could hear it clearly. Someone came up to ask. Is he your boyfriend? They pointed at me and asked Clarence. He didn't deny it, just raised an eyebrow. So don't ask for her phone number. I found it amusing. I walked up and shoved the flowers back into Clarence's arms. I'm not with him. I said this and left without looking at Clarence's darkening face. But it seemed like he couldn't let go. That evening after school, he followed me the whole way. Caroline, we already had an engagement. Today, I didn't deny it, just to stop them from spreading your phone number. I looked at him for 2 seconds, suddenly realizing he had never understood that he was wrong. Do you remember when you wrote me a marriage certificate when we were little? I turned my head, my gaze drifting off to one side. My voice was calm, but with the sudden drop in temperature, it sounded colder than usual. Back then, I was too young, and although I didn't understand the meaning of marriage, I knew that meant we could always be together. That made me feel safe. I looked at the boy in front of me, his eyes red. Because you said you would always protect me. But you broke the engagement you proposed and didn't do anything you promised. Clarence collapsed to his knees at my feet. He tightly held my hand. Don't say any more, Caroline, I've made so many mistakes. I slowly pulled my hand away, looking down at him. Yes, you made mistakes. The harm you caused me can't be erased. Clarence, I'll never forgive you. So please, stop following me. He didn't agree that day. When he left, he said he might have fallen for the wrong person. That night, I suddenly remembered that I hadn't thrown away that marriage certificate. After rummaging through my things, I found it, didn't look at it again, and ripped it into pieces, throwing it into the trash downstairs. For the next while, Clarence didn't bother me. But since we were in the same class, I could always catch him staring at me blankly whenever I turned around. I suppressed the frustration and tried not to pay attention to him. But one day, Clarence finally tore off his disguise. That was the last time I saw him, right before graduation. Even though I didn't give that guy my phone number that day, he would still occasionally barge into our classroom between lessons, bringing me little snacks. I had no choice but to return them, which would waste the entire break. Later, I started avoiding him so much that I probably really pissed him off. One day after school, he publicly confessed his feelings for me right at the school gate. His look of determination, combined with the cheesy, awkward confession, felt like pressure. "Sorry," I said in a businesslike tone. "I don't like you. She doesn't like you. Are you done yet?" Clarence, of course, noticed this scene. Today, there was a thin layer of anger on his face. The guy turned around, confused, and glared at him. "What's your relationship with her?" Clarence sneered and walked over, delivering a punch that sent him stumbling a few steps back. "She's obviously with me." With that, they started fighting. The recent academic pressure, plus Clarence's occasional meddling, was suffocating me. It felt like I couldn't breathe. Before things escalated further, they stopped fighting. It was a relief we didn't end up at the police station, but my frustration had reached its peak. On an empty street, Clarence stood in front of me with his head down, looking like he'd done something wrong. "I didn't mean to bother you, Caroline. I know you don't like him. I just wanted to help you get rid of him." "Clarence." My voice rose without me realizing it. "Please, stop doing these pointless things. All you're doing now is making me feel uncomfortable, do you understand? When I was bullied, you didn't show up, and now there's no need for you to." He stayed silent for a while, then spoke again, his voice weak. "I'm sorry." He pulled out a crumpled piece of paper from his bag. "After you threw it away, I picked it up and carefully put it back together." The wedding certificate was wrapped with layers of tape. His voice cracked, and his hands trembled. "You promised me, when we grew up, you'd only marry me." I barely remembered that day. I only recall being so angry at Clarence for not listening to me. I probably scolded him for a long time and slapped him several times. In the end, I sat on the side of the road, crying, begging him not to bother me anymore. The wedding certificate he'd worked so hard to piece together was torn apart again by me. And after that, Clarence truly never appeared in front of me again. The next day, his parents called in to excuse him from school. They said he would study at home for the last month before graduation. Though I was a bit surprised, I felt more of a sense of relief. It wasn't until graduation that I heard from my parents about what happened to Clarence. On the way home that evening, he was distracted and caused a car accident. He had been cooperating with the treatment, so there was a chance he could recover in time for the college entrance exam. But he became so negative that he even refused to take his medication. His mom even called my mom before the exam, hoping I could go talk to him. After hearing that, my dad grabbed the phone from her hand. "If he wants to ruin himself, don't drag my daughter into this." Clearly, he was still angry about the public breakup. I got into a prestigious university with excellent grades. The day I received my admission letter, I got a message from an unfamiliar number. "Congratulations on your bright future." It was the most formal message, and I immediately knew it was from Clarence. I didn't feel much of anything, simply blocked the number without a second thought. Breathing in the hot air, my heart was strangely calm. In my mind, everything from the past 6 months replayed like scenes in a movie, each frame more intense than the last. In the end, everything culminated at my graduation ceremony. Some got what they deserved. Some regretted their past choices. As for me, I got what I deserved. I held my admission letter in my hand, gazing at the direction of my future university. I knew my life was just beginning. The end.